I welcome you all to Group 1 Mains Paper 4 Indian Economy and Development. You are with Dr. E. Pavani, subject expert from Department of Economics, Government City College. And today's topic to be discussed is Public Finance, Part 1. The contents of today's topic are like this. First is tax structure in India, where a comparison is made between the central taxes and the state taxes. The second one is about government expenditure in revenue account and capital account. And the third aspect is going to be about public debt. What are the various types of public debt? What is the composition of the public debt? What is internal debt and what is external debt? Before going to the tax structure, let me first tell to you that public finance deals with the revenue, expenditure and debt program policy of the central government as well as the state government also. It is very essential to understand the type of revenue that the government receives, the type of expenditure that the government does, and the types of loans which the government raises for the purpose of running economic system. Especially for developing economies, this happens to be more important because a developing economy has to attain not only development but has to target higher economic growth with social justice and equal opportunities. Coming to the next aspect, what exactly is tax? Tax may be defined as the amount of money that is paid to the government at predefined rates and at periodical or regular intervals. So, as this definition tells to us, tax is a defined amount of money, and this fixed amount of money is defined by the rates which are given by the government, and at periodical intervals it has to be paid to the government. It's a kind of compulsory payment made to the government to enable the government to take up its various developmental activities and to run the administration also. And the most important source of revenue for the government is taxes. Then basically speaking, there are two types of taxes, or the taxes which are going to provide important sources of revenue or acting as the chief source of revenue to the government are of two types. One is direct taxes and the other is indirect taxes. Direct taxes are defined as those types of taxes where the impact as well as the incidence falls on the same person. That is, shifting of the tax burden is not at all possible under these direct taxes. For example, income tax can be specifically told as the best example for direct tax because a person who earns income has to bear the impact of the tax as well as he has to bear even the incidence. He is going to become responsible for the final payment of the tax imposed on him. Shifting is not at all possible under this direct tax. If you come to the indirect taxes where impact falls on one person, incidence falls on another person. The best example for indirect taxes happens to be sales tax, where the sales tax are imposed on the units or production units which are going to sell the goods and services. In the first part, the impact is experienced by these first hand or first class producers who are going to sell the goods and services. But later on, the incidence of the tax is going to be shifted onto the heads of the consumers, where by means of small or minute increase in the prices, the burden of the taxes are going to be shifted on to the heads of the consumers, and the consumers may not be knowing also sometimes the amount of increase for the purpose of covering the tax burden by the under the sales tax by the firms selling different types of goods and services may not even be experienced by the consumers also. So in India, the direct taxes are totally looked after, or the predetermined rates and the periodical intervals at which the direct taxes have to be paid, especially income taxes, taken care of by the Central Board of Direct Taxes. Indirect taxes or the policies related to the indirect taxes are taken care of or are controlled or supervised by the Central Board of Excise and Customs, CBCE. If you come to the tax structure in India, the Indian Constitution through Article 246 provides for a three-tier federal structure of taxation system, where the right to impose the taxes and collect the taxes and enjoy the revenue coming in the form of taxes is given to the state government, union government, state government, and even to the local or municipal government. So, as per the Indian Constitution, we have three lists: central list, state list, and the concurrent list. Central list comprises of all those taxes which come under the purview of the state central government, like taxes on income other than the agricultural income, corporation tax, customs duties, excise duties, except on alcoholic liquors for human consumption and opium and other narcotics. Central list also includes taxes on capital value of assets, estate duties, stamp duties, taxes other than stamp duty on transactions in stock exchanges and future markets, taxes on interstate sale of goods, taxes on sale and purchase of newspapers and on advertisements published in them, taxes on goods and passengers carried by railways, sea or air, taxes on railway fare and freight. Taxes which are not specifically enumerated either in the state list and concurrent list can also be taken care of by the central government. If we come to the state list, these are some of the important taxes which come under the purview of the state government. The state government enjoys the exclusive right of imposing taxes on these different types of taxes, like the land revenue, taxes on agricultural income, duties in respect of succession to agricultural land, which is most common in most parts of the rural areas in India, estate duty in respect of agricultural land, excise duty on alcoholic liquors and narcotics, taxes on entry of goods into local area, taxes on consumption and sale of electricity, taxes on sale or purchase of goods other than newspapers, taxes on lands and buildings likewise. Then state list also comprises of taxes on advertisements, taxes on goods and passengers carried by road on inland water transport, taxes on vehicles, taxes on animals and boats, toll taxes, taxes on professions, taxes on luxuries, etc., etc. So these are some of the classification between the direct taxes and indirect taxes. We have income tax, wealth tax, property tax also called as capital gains tax, gift tax also called as inheritance or estate tax, corporate tax. All these 5 types of taxes basically are considered as the most important and most popular famous types of direct taxes in India. If we take the indirect taxes, customs duties, excise duty, security transaction tax, goods and service taxes are the most popularly remembered, memorized or known to the general public type of indirect taxes in India. Then apart from this type of tax categorization, we also have another very famous categorization of the taxes, where we classify the taxes into progressive taxes, regressive taxes, digressive taxes and proportional taxes. So under this classification, a kind of comparison is made between the tax base and the tax rate. Suppose if the tax base of the general public is increasing, and as the tax base is increasing, if the tax rate is going to be increased, such a type of taxation is called as progressive taxation. If we come to the regressive, when the tax base is increasing, tax rate instead of increasing is getting decreased. Such a type of taxation is called as regressive taxation. Thirdly, when the tax base is increasing, tax rate increases to a particular level. After that level, it becomes almost stagnant or constant. So such a type of taxation system, where when the tax base of the general public is increasing, but the tax rate increases to a certain level, and after that, thereafter it becomes constant or stagnant, such a type of taxation is called as digressive. And then we have the proportional taxation, where irrespective of whether the tax base of the general public is increasing or decreasing, the tax rate continues to remain same, proportional taxation. The next aspect after different classification of the taxation is characteristics of Indian tax structure. There are 5 important characteristics of Indian tax structure. First is heavily biased towards the tax revenue. So the tax structure is totally, it is designed for the purpose of raising as much tax revenue as possible. In 2008-9 budget, estimated tax revenue was as high as 84%, and tax revenue contributes to be the predominant share to the total revenue of union government. Second important characteristic feature is rising tax to GDP ratio. Tax GDP ratio steadily increasing due to rise in tax revenue. In 2007-8, it was 18.3%. If you take the Western countries, the tax GDP ratio lies somewhere between 30 to 40%. indicating that a tax collection in relation to GDP when compared with the Western countries is miserably low, and this is happening because of the tax evasion, a large scale tax evasion, which is a very common phenomenon in India. As a result of which, though the rate of taxation in the world or when compared with the other countries in the world is quite high in India, yet we are not able to raise as much expected revenue as possible, and the main reason is because of the tax evasion, which is continuously becoming or making the state of tax revenue collection miserable. Then predominance of indirect taxes. When compared with the direct taxes, the ratio or the proportion of the indirect taxes in the total tax revenue is quite high. The amount of revenue that was collected from direct taxes was 36.2% in 2008-9, and but the amount of revenue that was collected from indirect taxes was 85.7% in the same year. If you see for different years as a part of comparison, the ratio of direct taxes to indirect taxes was 40% of direct taxes when compared with 60% of the indirect taxes in 50-51, showing that the proportion of indirect tax revenue was more when compared with the direct tax revenue in the total tax revenue. In 1990 and 91, the ratio was 16:84. Indirect taxes proportion has increased when compared with the direct taxes. Somehow, after the introduction of economic reforms and liberalization, globalization, privatization reforms, in 2008 and 9, because of several tax reforms and because of the steps taken by the government to reduce the tax evasion and making stringent rules and regulations, slowly the proportion of the direct taxes appears to be increasing. The ratio, if you see over here, it was 16% in 1991. Now it has increased to 36%. Likewise, the proportion of the indirect taxes or the percentage of the indirect taxes, which was 84%, has come down to 64%. Corporate tax happens to be the largest direct tax, contributing to 4% of GDP in 2007-8. This corporate tax, which is the largest direct tax source, is collected from public sector undertakings, petroleum producing companies also. Then service tax happens to be slightly a great success also in this kind of tax. Then defective tax structure, greater dominance of indirect taxes is there in India. Tax evasion and higher exemption limit resulting in mere only 3% of the Indians are paying income tax, which shows the pathetic condition of the direct tax situation in India, in spite of government taking so many stringent measures to increase the tax base by increasing the tax rates and controlling tax evasion also. The collection of taxes in India is quite high, and the commodity tax structure, there were several changes, like first there was MODVAT. Later on, this MODVAT got transformed into central value added taxes, moderate value added taxes, central value added tax, and later on value added tax. Now the same VAT has got transformed into goods and services taxes. So goods and services taxes, the modern or the recently new phenomenon which has got added to the basket of the taxes available in India, especially the indirect taxes, came into effect from July 1, 2017, and through 101 amendment of the Indian Constitution. This GST tax is, comes under the purview of GST Council, which frames rules and regulations pertaining to the GST tax. And this GST Council has the central finance minister along with the finance ministers of all the states as the members. Then it is a successor to VAT. It is a digitalized form of VAT, and the destination, it is also called as destination based tax, which is collected from the point of consumption and not from the point of origin, which is an important characteristic feature of the goods and services taxes. The goods and services are divided into 5 slabs for the collection of the tax. We have 5 different slabs starting from 0%, 5%, 12%, 18%, and 28%. Petroleum products, alcoholic drinks, and electricity are the 3 types of commodities which are exempted from the goods and services taxes. And these alcoholic drinks and electricity totally comes under the purview of the state government taxes. 0.25% of GST is also imposed on precious stones and 3% on gold. With this, we have finished about the tax structure of India. Now coming to the second part of the public finance part 1 is what is government expenditure in revenue account and capital account. So the first part was on how the income of the government is accumulated in the form of taxes, and these taxes were of different types, direct and indirect taxes basically speaking. Now comes to the second part of public finance, that is government expenditure. So government does different types of expenditures. The annual financial statement of the government has two accounts, that is revenue account or capital account. Instead of saying the annual financial statement, we can say that the government activities are maintained, that is financial activities are maintained in the form of a statement, and this statement comprises of two accounts, one is revenue account and the capital account. So government expenditure is the base of public finance, and government does different types of expenditures like on agriculture, rural development, energy, population growth and urbanization. When urbanization and intense population growth takes place in the economy, likewise, the expenditure of the government also increases for the purpose of maintaining this extra population in the country. Maintaining economic stability, another important target. Capital formation is nothing but formation or adding up, creating new physical assets, capital assets, which are going to add to the total capital structure of the country, which is called as capital formation. And whatever loans and borrowings are taken, raised by the government previously, they have to be serviced also. Such debt servicing also comes under the purview of public expenditure. Several anti-poverty schemes are framed and implemented by the government, which has to be financed in the form of government expenditure, and improving overall GDP also. Types of public expenditure, we have basically two types of public expenditure, revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure items, defense, administration, day-to-day administration, subsidies, salaries, interest payments. Subsidy is a new term where we have two types of subsidies, producer subsidy and consumer subsidy. Government gives the subsidies for the purpose of encouraging, motivating consumers as well as the producers for continuously increasing the consumption of certain specified commodities. If you take the example of the consumers, the LPG cylinder subsidy comes as a consumer's subsidy. And if you take the case of producer's subsidy, the fertilizers and the manures and the seeds which are offered to the farmers at very subsidized rates for the purpose of motivating them to take up hybrid variety of cultivation during the time of the Green Revolution, can be specified as the best producer's subsidy example. Interest payments also. Then capital expenditure, research and development, transportation, health and education, industrial units, irrigation projects, investments. All these are the items on which the capital expenditure these items come under the capital expenditure. This is about the structure of the government accounts. Government accounts are of three types. One is consolidated fund, contingency fund and the public account. So consolidated fund can be defined as that fund which acts as a kind of bank account to the government, where the government deposits its money in the consolidated fund and also utilizes the same money to meet different types of expenditures. So if you take the consolidated fund, the receipts come in the form of revenue receipts. Revenue receipts comprise of tax, non-tax and grants in aid. And in the same way, it also has the capital receipts. Capital receipts come in the form of public debt and loans and etc. Capital receipts. Then revenue account also has expenditure. So revenue expenditure in the form of general services, social services, etc., which we have already talked about. Then capital account has expenditures or payments which are called as capital expenditures, like general services, social services, economic services, public debt, loans, settlement, etc. If you take the public account, small savings, provident funds, reserve funds, deposits, advances, remittances, all these come under the public account. So the structure of government account, if we take annual accounts of the central government, state government, union territory governments are recorded in the form of recorded transactions during a financial year, which tells us about the government account. Government accounts maintained in three divisions, as we have already tried to understand in the previous slide in the form of flowchart. Consolidated fund, government's main bank account. Contingent fund, reserve of money which is set aside to cover possible future emergency expenses or unforeseen, unexpected, unpredictable expenses. Public accounts constituted by Article 266 of Indian Constitution. All public money is received by the Government of India or the state government or on behalf of Government of India or state government shall be credited into this public accounts. Now, this new slide is going to enlighten us about exactly the difference between the revenue account and the capital account. If you take the revenue account comprises of revenue receipts and revenue expenditures. Revenue receipts are characterized as recurring in nature, that is, they are continuously going to be spent or going to be received in the conduct of day-to-day business activities of the government. It includes sales, interest received, bad loans which are recovered, all tax receipts, non-tax receipts and grants in it. Likewise, we have revenue expenditures which include expenditures on maintenance of assets, developmental, non-developmental works, etc. If you take the capital account, the composition of capital account comprises of capital receipts and capital expenditures. Capital receipts include all non-revenue receipts which are non-recurring in nature and shown as a future liability on the part of the government in the balance sheet. Capital expenditures occurs when any asset is purchased or created directly, enhancing the earning capacity of the government business. In this context, I would like to quote an example pertaining to what is exactly the revenue expenditure and capital expenditure and how we can differentiate. For example, if you take an individual as such, if an individual is going to purchase a vehicle, and if we take the example of the government is going to create a new asset, maybe a kind of irrigation project. When the vehicle is purchased by an individual, during the process of utilizing that particular vehicle, there can be certain repairs and certain damages. The expenditures made towards such damages and repairs is called as revenue expenditure on the part of the individual. In the same way, on the part of the government, when the government is going to do certain expenditures for the maintenance of that irrigation project, then it becomes the revenue expenditure of the government. If you come to the case of the individual, when the vehicle which is purchased by him is going to be repaired or going to be changed, modified in such a way that its producing capacity is going to increase, then such a type of expenditure is going to be called as capital expenditure. Here in the case of the government, if the irrigation project's capacity is enhanced, if the irrigation project's productivity is enhanced, so that irrigation project is going to help out increased productivities in the next part of the days or months or maybe year, such type of expenditure is called as the capital expenditure on the part of the government. So basically, revenue expenditure is maintenance expenditure and capital expenditure is the asset creating expenditure or productivity enhancing kind of expenditure, in simplified words. The third part of today's discussion, public finance part 1, happens to be the public debt. So after getting revenues and utilizing these revenues for the purpose of meeting several development expenditures, the next important function of the government is if there is going to be any kind of imbalance, and definitely there is going to be imbalance because the modern governments have different types of activities to take up, and to meet these activities, whatever sources of revenue that are available to the government are insufficient. The case is more true in terms of Indian economy because right from the beginning, Indian government had been promoting framing different policies for the development of the country. The objective of attaining economic development and with the growth, the objective of welfare state, the objective of equitable social justice, equal opportunities to the general public shows that the government has innumerable number of objectives to be fulfilled. And for the purpose of fulfilling these innumerable objectives, the amount of income in the form of the tax revenue received either from the direct taxes or indirect taxes is not sufficient. As a result of which expenditures exceeding and the revenues decreasing or not insufficient, government will be forced to take up or borrow loans like a normal individual. So the borrowing aspect of the government, either state government, central government or the local government, is called as public debt. So public debt is the government debt representing total outstanding debt, bonds and securities of a country's central government. It is expressed as a ratio of a gross domestic product. It can be raised externally from the other countries and internally from within the country. So external sources could be the governments of the other countries, citizens living in the other countries, financial agencies living in the financial institutions in the other countries. Internally, it could be banks, it could be individuals within the country or financial institutions within the country. So external debt is debt owed to lenders outside the country, and internal debt is owed to domestic lenders. So anyway, when compared with external and internal debt is quite favorable because it simply indicates the movement of the money from one hands to the other, to the hands of the government. But external debt is quite dangerous because the entire country or the total number of individuals living in the country becomes indebted to the other country, and that becomes dangerous. Sometimes it may lead to some kind of untoward competition between countries as such when the external debt is not cleared off. The types of public debts, we have different types of public debts. The first one is voluntary debt and compulsory debt. When the general public come forward for the purpose of taking the bonds and securities issued by the government, such type of debt is called as voluntary debt. Sometimes during the time of the inflation and during the times of the war, in order to cut down the amount of purchasing power in the hands of the general public, government also frames rules and regulations and encourages the people, or compulsorily sometimes forces the people to voluntarily or to compulsorily purchase bonds and securities. And purchasing of bonds and securities is nothing but providing debt to the government. Then we have the productive debt, when the debt taken by the government is utilized for productive purposes, that is creation of the assets which are going to enhance the productive capacity of the economy, is called as productive debt. Unproductive debt is the debt when utilized for unproductive purposes, maybe could be maintenance of the defense or providing of the subsidies, something like that. Then we have the third one, funded debt and unfunded debt. Funded debt is there is a kind of guaranteed time during which the debt taken is going to be repaid, that is principal amount. And however, the rate of interest is paid quite regularly. Unfunded debt or floating debt is the guarantee of repaying the principal amount is not only doubtful, but even the payment of the interest rate also sounds and appears to be doubtful. It's quite surprising to know that the government even have the capacity to raise such unfunded debt and floating debt. However, such kind of debts are usually raised in times of emergencies only. Then coming to the next one, redeemable debt and irredeemable debt. Redeemable debt are those debts which are going to be redeemed in future at some point of time in the future. Irredeemable debt, there is no guarantee that the principal amount or the interest amount is going to be repaid. Then coming to the internal debt and external debt, I think I have already covered in the previous slide. Then causes and effects of public debt. So what are the causes, why the government usually goes for public debt, and why the percentage of public debt as a ratio of GDP is increasing day by day. So previously, war preparation, war period expenditure, post-war situation was one of the reasons, but however, the recently occurring, the contemporary war which has taken place between Russia and Ukraine also tells that in the modern days also war is possible and public debt may increase. Development expenditures, covering deficit budget, curbing economic depression. These are some of the causes. Effects. Public debt definitely have the negative effect on production, on investment, consumption, on expenditure, on liquidity, on because the responsibility to pay interest lies on the government and indirectly lies on the general public. The government may go for new kinds of taxation for the purpose of repaying the debts taken along with the rate of interest. Sometimes the government may also enhance the tax rates also. Whether new taxes are imposed on the general public or the present tax rates are enhanced by the government, both these two types of policies are going to discourage the ability and the interest of the general public to work, and their capability of to work also is indirectly negatively affected. Then methods of debt, public debt redemption. There are these many methods. Conversion, where The higher rate interested principal amounts are converted into low rate loans, low interest rate loans. Sinking fund, where a fund is maintained and every year some amount of the budget is going to be credited so that the amount from the sinking fund is going to be utilized for the repayment of the loan along with the rate of interest. Repudiation is a very funny type of method of public debt redemption. Sometimes the government in the course of time, over a long period of time after taking the debt, can disclaim and openly state that it is not in a position to repay back the debt amount, even the rate of interest also. Capital levy or special levy imposing tax on capital goods possession by the public beyond their minimum level. So this is about internal and external debt. Internal debt is mobilized within the country from different sources such as banks, individuals. This I think I have already covered. Internal debt versus external debt. External debt involves both direct money burden, that is disposable income gets reduced, and real money burden where willingness and capacity to work also is going to be negatively affected. And debt burden in case of external debt is going to be more. And to calculate debt burden, we use the formula total public debt divided by the gross domestic product. The contemporary situation in India pertaining to the public debt, Indian government's total debt continuously was increasing. So the same thing happened even in 2022. It stood at 147.19 lakh crore in 2022. External debt amounted to $620.7 billion. Internal debt amounted to 1,751.8 USD, I mean to say United States dollars in billion. Then the external debt to GDP ratio was 19.9%. India's public debt as a percentage of GDP increased to 60.5% during the time of the pandemic. Then quickly we'll see the different types of questions which were asked in the previous question papers belonging to the APPSC Group 1 as well as even to in the UPSC. So justify the view that public debt is essential for the development of Indian economy endowed with natural resources. Then critically analyze the causes and consequences of India's public debt relating to the period from 1991 till date. So after 1991, liberalization, privatization, globalization, because of which the flow of debt has become cheaper as well as easier, one important cause. And later on, recently because of the pandemic also the public debt has increased. The consequences definitely are going to be quite bittersome and even negative also. Examine the relative shares of direct and indirect tax revenues of Indian government in the post-reform period. So before the economic reforms, the indirect tax proportion was more when compared with the direct tax proportion, but later on it has changed in a reverse manner. Explain the important tax reforms in India since 91. Public expenditure management is a big challenge to the government of India in the context of budget making during the post-economic reforms period. Explain the pattern of revenue collection after economic reforms in India. Public expenditure fuels economic development. Explain the rationale behind the GST, Compensation to States Act of 2017. How was COVID-19 impacted GST compensation fund and created new federal tensions? Then enumerate indirect taxes which have been subsumed in GST in India. Comment on the revenue implications of GST since 2017. So when the previous question papers were served, these were the important topics on which questions were asked. And the topics basically revolve on the GST, on the public debt, and on the contemporary issue of how COVID-19 has impacted the GST compensation fund. With this, we come to the end of Part 1 of the Public Finance under Paper 4 Indian Economy and Development offered for the Group 1 mains students as coaching classes under TSAT. Thank you for being with me. We'll meet once again in Part 2 Public Finance.